I know that we were part of the beginning stage of the rebirth of that home back in 1994 to where it is at now. And and just her leadership and her guidance and her experience, and I still learn from her every single day. And we are partners in this for as long as God is giving us the opportunity and the health to continue this. And we've done wonderful and amazing work, and we still have a lot more work that we can do to help just so many kids that need help. So appreciate her as a partner and as a friend, and I know we're going to continue to be doing wonderful work.
It's awesome. Well, I know just like in my own business and the places that I've worked that without that right partnership or that mentorship, it's hard to succeed. Clearly, you bring a huge a part of this equation, right? And for you to have found somebody that you mesh with so well and you guys have accomplished so much, I'm appreciative that I know you both and that we get to work with you. And I hope in 10 years, 15 years from now, we're talking about some of the things that we were able to help you with and sharing those successes. So thanks for being on the air for a minute and giving us a little intro. And I'd love to get Hilda on now, and let's hear from her and hear a little bit about her story.
Great. Thank you very much, and appreciate this opportunity.
Thanks, George. So as we transfer the mics here in the office, I'm continue to be awestruck about what people are able to accomplish when they have a dream and a goal. And as George said, he said yes to the opportunity of coming over here many, many years ago. And I'm sure every morning he's got to get up and say yes to, coming here and continuing his work. So it's just great to be here. So, okay, Hilda.
Hi, Jim.
It's so good to see you. I know you guys are so busy, right?
Always. Always.
I didn't expect to see so many people when I walked in the office. You described it as small previously, and I walked in here, and you've got lots of stuff going on, and you've got happy, smiling faces in here, all doing something special, I'm sure.
Yes, definitely. We just completed a golf tournament last week, and so we've got all the stuff here, and we're closing the books on that. So everybody's doing their part to close that. But there's always something going on.
Yeah.
I mean, our fundraising events, our trips, everything. So we've got kids to support, so there's always a lot going on.
Yeah. Wow. Well, with that being said, people that have followed along my new company, Baja United Group, where we're importing wines from Baja, and they heard my story a few weeks ago on our first podcast, and that was about when I decided to start this business with Eric Morley at Blue Sea Advertising. It was to create a business that was sustainable enough to donate and give back to the orphanages in Baja. And when we wrote that business plan, our notion was we had been working with Rancho Milagro for so long that we were just going to continue to go down that path. And as you know, they've had some challenges over there and some shutdowns, and that door closed on us. And it almost seemed like an overwhelming task to find another orphanage that we believed and trusted in and knew the organizers that the money would go to the right place. And of course, I bump into George right at the right time in my life and in the life of the business to be reminded of the work that you guys are doing. And I'm sorry that I had to be reminded because we were acquainted before many years ago when I was back at Kettle One. But for the listeners that have heard me tell them that we donate everything that we can to Corazon de Vida, and then that's what our mission statement for the years to come, I would love for them to hear your story as you want it to be told, so that when they buy a bottle of wine or any of our other future products, beer, merchandise, etc., that a percentage of that is going to your foundation. I want them to know what it's actually going towards. So maybe you can give us a little bit of background, when you started this and why, and then we can kind of dig into where you're at today.
Sure. I'll get into that, but before I get into that, I want to really talk about something that George talked about earlier. He mentioned how he left this super busy life, in work with the beeper and all the things going on. And it's kind of funny because I think he's working 2 or 3 times as much with Corazon de Vida. I mean, you're looking at a guy that's 100 hours plus a week, and He's been just the best partner in this organization, and he is definitely our direct link to the orphanages and the kids.
Yeah.
We spend most of our time on the administrative side, here in the office, and we don't get as much of the face-to-face time with the directors and with the children, and that's exactly George's role.
Yeah.
And it has been for the last 14 years or so. And it is just amazing what we're able to do with, just a few people. But one key element is definitely the work that George does. And the fact that he is, 5 o'clock in the morning, you send an email, he's responding. Midnight, you send an email, he's responding. And, we kind of run the same hours.
Yeah, it seems like it.
It's a lot of work, and it can only come from love. Yeah. It really can, because, the pay is certainly not there for that kind of work. And it really can only come from love and commitment.
And he's so smooth at it, too. Every
Yes.
time I've talked to him, he's gracious. He's happy to hear from you. You can't even tell there's a bone of stress in his body. But I'm sure he's got a full schedule, and he's running a million miles an hour.
Oh, definitely. And I really, it's wonderful that he was able to connect with you. And I remember him coming back and telling me about the group. And I was so excited. I said, oh, that's perfect. Baja Wines, Baja Orphanages.
Yeah.
It just makes sense. And we kind of reached out to you by email, but I know that it was a while before we actually connected.
Yeah.
Several months, actually.
We were trying to start a business.
Exactly.
We knew what we wanted. We just couldn't tell you yet.
So it was really great. And I'm so grateful for that, for that connection and for our ability to work together to support the children in Baja.
You.
So it's a little bit of background for your listeners.
Yeah, thank you.
My siblings and I lived in one of the orphanages, and as George mentioned earlier, Door of Faith, Puerta de Fe, in La Misión, and we were really fortunate to be able to find a space in an orphanage because the alternative was not a good alternative.
Sure.
My father had left the family. My mom had 4 kids at the time. I was the oldest of 4. And she really wasn't prepared to be the breadwinner for the family. She was raised to be a homemaker. She never went to school. So she wasn't really prepared to be single and have to work and provide for us. She just couldn't make enough money.
And what city
to
were
be
you
able
in?
To provide. In Ensenada.
In Ensenada.
In Ensenada, but my family lived in Valle de Guadalupe.
Okay.
So my family's originally from Jalisco. And they came to Valle de Guadalupe, I believe, in the 40s or 50s. And but as a child, I lived in Ensenada for a few years. Then I lived in Valle de Guadalupe for about a year. And then after that is when we ended up in the orphanage. I was 8 years old at the time, and I was the oldest of my 4 siblings. So that's that's a connection between the orphanages and Corazón de Vida. Years later, I ended up in the U.S., and years after that, I went back to visit the orphanage where I grew up and realized that they needed a lot of help.
Yeah.
It was just not the same home that it was when I lived there. When my siblings and I were there, it had a lot of support. We had everything we needed. And when I went down in 93, the orphanage had lost a lot of their support and could barely feed the 35 kids that they had.
Yeah. Can we talk about the orphanage for a second while you were there? Because, people, they have different notions of what an orphanage is like in Mexico. And I've really seen both sides. I've seen orphanages that, I'm not going to say that they're flourishing with supplies and everything, but I've seen a lot of happiness in the orphanages and the kids and the leadership there. But they have needs, and those needs come from elsewhere, like Corazón de Vida or churches up here in the U.S. And then I've seen really bad situations, too, where you don't even know where to start. And I think it's important for people to understand there's both, right? I mean, there's some happy kids that are in orphanages, although that's where they're at.
Sure. And I think what I say, the reason for that is the orphanage system in Mexico is a private system. And it's mostly started by people that really love children and they want to help.
Yeah.
So it's not started as a business. It's not started as a place where the government's going to funnel a lot of funds through. It's just usually a pastor and his wife that start bringing in kids from the streets, and they start getting local support. Then they go after support from the U.S., and before you know it, they've got 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 kids.
Yeah.
And it turns into an orphanage. So they're not institutions, and that makes a big difference, because the people that are there because they love children and they want to help. So, and there's a little bit of a balance, because you might, you have people that have a huge heart, and on the other side, the financial, management might not be there, the ability to really plan ahead. So a lot of these orphanages just live on faith.
Yeah, sure.
So it's not like they're planning, I can't take 3 more kids because I won't be able to feed them. They just say yes. They say yes to bringing in more kids, and then they figure out how to feed them.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the way it works. So that's why you see some orphanages that look like they have plenty, but it may be plenty that week, it may be plenty that month, but then what happens after that? The support has to be constant.
Sure.
And there are other orphanages, when you arrive, you can see right away they just don't have
They're suffering.
enough. They're suffering.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's always a cycle. And one of the things that we decided as Corazón de Vida was that we would help these orphanages have funding, consistent funding, so that they could ride those waves.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's help from churches, from organizations, especially all the ones that are close to the border, from a lot of amazing groups that come down and bring food, they bring supplies, they bring clothing, they bring toys. But in the middle of that, there's other needs. They've got to pay the electricity bill, they've got to pay the water bill, they've got to pay for gasoline to transport the kids to school. So all those things are things that if they don't have the funding to do that, then that's where they suffer the most. So we try to be as consistent as possible in providing the funding to the 10 orphanages that we support. So each of those orphanages has a specific amount that Corazón de Vida provides for them, and they know they can count on that.
Yeah, yeah. I don't want to get you too far off the path of your story. You talked about revisiting the orphanage that you grew up in, and you realized it wasn't the same place. Can you give us an example of some of the things that stuck out that weren't the same to you, that prompted you to want to start something like this?
Sure. The main difference was the facilities themselves. The buildings were run down, and a really, really striking difference for me was when it was time, the number of kids, on the other hand, because when I lived there, it was 100 kids. Mm-hmm. So when I visited in 93, they were down to 35 kids. And they could barely feed those kids.
Oh.
I was there around lunchtime. I remember going into the kitchen, and I just couldn't even believe that they were serving. And I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was something like beans and potato chips or rice and potato chips or something like that. That it wasn't really a meal.
Yeah.
And it really struck me to think that I had everything I needed when I lived there.
Sure.
And so I didn't know how orphanages worked. I really didn't know that the government wasn't funding it. I didn't know any of that. So I started to ask a lot of questions, and I figured, I wanted to help. When I found out that the orphanages survived 100% through the generosity of individuals and organizations, that's when I decided I've got to do something to help.
Were you working full-time when you went down there?
I was working full-time. And I had been working for the company for about 5 years.
Uh-huh.
I hadn't told anybody about my background. I had not mentioned anything. I was learning a new language. I was in a professional capacity in this company. And so I was really trying to learn as much as I could, assimilate, do my job the best I could. And I really didn't want to have anybody feel sorry for me.
Sure.
Because of my background. But coming back and deciding that I wanted to do something to help, I knew that it was going to be important to tell people my story as a way for them to understand why I really wanted to help this orphanage. And really it was the biggest blessing for me. My closest community at the time was my work community, the people that I work with, the owners of the company that I work for. And they all decided to help right away. Every one of them said yes.
Wow.
Every one of them.
Wow.
And it started with, let's sponsor each